The man in the middle of this historic photo was Jimmy Carter, the former US president. The men he shook hands with were the former leaders of Egypt and Israel. At a similar event in 1993, again with the former leaders of the United States, Israel, and this time, Palestine. These were landmark peace deals attempted to stabilize a decades-long Israeli-Arab conflict. Deals that would lead 5 of them to win Nobel Peace Prizes. But also to these men's death sentences. Another peace deal was unveiled at the White House in September, which added 2 more Arab countries on top of Jordan and Egypt. Subsequently, these 2 have already been nominated for the ultimate award. Why do these deals warrant such high honor and hatred at the same time? What's the big deal with the Middle East tensions anyway?
That seeks the destruction of Israel and murder of Jews everywhere.
The story centered here, in a small piece of land in the Middle East. This was believed to be where Jesus spent his whole life, or where Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven, if you believe in Islam. It was also the home to Judaism. That is why Israel was considered the holiest place on the planet. Before it was Israel, this place was called Palestine. Since 16th century, Palestine was just an area within the Ottoman Empire. Then, World War I happened. Within this multinational empire, there was a large Arab population. During the war, Britain made a secret offer to this man, Hussein bin Ali, the Arab leader in the region. It went, if you agree to launch an Arab revolt against the Ottomans, we'll agree to recognize a single unified Arab state. Deal? Hussein bit the bullet, and the Ottoman Empire became history. Hussein proceeded to establish an Arab state in the region. Who are we kidding? That did not happen. Little did he know, the Brits also cut a secret deal with the French. Instead of granting Arab people their state, France and Britain would carve up the Arab territories in 2, asserting influence over the area. The rhetoric was, we're not colonizing the lands, we're just temporarily running them, until such time as these Arab people are able to stand alone. This was called a mandate, or a babysitter the Arab people never hired.
The guardian of law and order looks out over the old walled city of Jerusalem.
To add insult to injury, this babysitter started inviting guests from Europe into the mandatory Palestine, which weren't exactly strangers. These, air quote, guests were actually Jewish people. To understand why, let's back up a little. Jewish presence in this area dated back to 2000 BC, way before the Ottomans. Long story short, Jews lived here for thousands of years, but had a fallout with the Romans in the 1st century. They were kicked out of their home and scattered across Europe. For thousands of years, they were homeless. Nonetheless, Jewish people had dreamt of rebuilding a Jewish state someday and name it Israel. They even started a movement for it. This wild dream eventually got the support of this babysitter. Britain declared to facilitate the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in the mandatory Palestine. This was the Balfour Declaration. With the backing of the British government, Jews from around the world returned to their ancestral home. While the Palestinian Arabs were like, that's not cool, I thought we had a deal for an Arab state. But the camel's nose was already in. From being a minority, the Jewish population grew substantially. This drastic shift caused constant communal riots for decades to come. Both Arabs and Jews committed horrific atrocities.
For making the Holy Land a land of terror.
Britain failed to contain the violence and straight up left. The UN then once again took the liberty to carve Palestine up in 2.
The map shows what partition means. The Jewish state colored light, the Arab state dark, Jaffa to go to the Arabs, Jerusalem internationalized.
Let's recap. Britain promised an Arab state once the Arabic people helped take down the Ottoman Empire, but ended up splitting the region with France. Britain then started inviting Jews into Palestine to rebuild their ancestral home. Palestinian Arabs got pissed because this wasn't part of the deal, and started a civil war with the Jews. UN then played the referee and tried to break up the fight by literally breaking up the land. Just like that, Israel was born, but the dust was hardly settled.
For the 3rd time since its birth as an independent state, Israel is embroiled in a war with the Arab nations that surround her.
Palestinians didn't concur to the petition in 1947. Together with the Arab world, they launched numerous wars against Israel throughout the next few decades, only to lose more lands to Israeli occupation in the process, most notably West Bank, Golan Heights, and East Jerusalem. So there you have it. Both Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs want the same land. Both feel legitimacy in their entitlement, and both are willing to die for it. Palestinians were largely marginalized over the decades. At this point, the conflicts are almost impossible to untangle. That doesn't mean the leaders have stopped trying. But ultranationalists and jihadists tend to see treaties as concessions and betrayals to their own people, hence the assassinations. Palestinians are left with these scattered black dots. The Arab world doesn't get along with the Israelis. None of them recognize Israel, except for the countries that signed treaties, Jordan and Egypt. With the signing of the Abraham Accord in 2020, 2 more countries will break the ice with Israel, Bahrain and UAE. What does that all mean? They will establish diplomatic ties. They can now set up companies and embassies in each other's territories. There will be direct flights, tourism, and more. It's a victory for Netanyahu and Trump, and a slap in the face for the Palestinians, who had since exchanged fire with Israel right after the signing.
To respond to explosive devices that are attached to balloons and have flown in from the Gaza Strip and
This brings a paradigm shift to the region. Is it a good thing? Depends. Good as in fair and just, or good as in what brings peace? They aren't necessarily the same thing. Some might even simply deem good as in whatever helps their favorite leaders get re-elected. Will this deal bring peace then? Only time will tell. If you learned something new in this video, click subscribe and the bell icon to get notified for similar weekly interesting content. For instance, what has Donald Trump done in the first 1,300 days of his presidency? Click on the next video and I'll give it to you straight in a simple timeline. See you next week.